Thank you so much for listening. I'm so excited to start this podcast. This is the first episode of The View from Peru, and I'm really excited to talk about Peru, missions, ministry, education, what it's like growing up as a third culture kid, and all of that. First off, my name is Christopher Frey. I've been a missionary in Lima, Peru for about 4 years now. I am married. My beautiful wife, her name is Paola, and we've been married for 2 years. And our ministries here consist of two main aspects. The first one would be the school. I've been serving as a missionary teacher at International Christian School of Lima for 3.5 years. And this is such a unique ministry. I've taught at schools in the States before, but what makes teaching at ICSL so different is its evangelistic purpose. ICS Lima is part of NICS, Network of International Christian Schools, and I'm sorry for throwing so many acronyms at you, but ICSL is part of NICS. And NICS' purpose is to start schools in countries that will attract the different business and government communities in those countries. So how this works in Peru is ICS Lima is in one of the wealthiest districts of the city, Miraflores. And the reason is because ICS Lima is designed to be a gospel reaching, gospel sharing light to the different expat, business, and government communities here in Lima. And just about all of those types of people, the expats or people that work in the government or businesses, all of that really happens mostly in Miraflores. So most of the kids live only a few blocks away and they're able to walk to school. We have about half of our students are not saved yet. And that's on purpose. Unlike many schools in the States where you actually have to say that you're a Christian as a kid in order to go there, we want to attract non-saved kids. We want to attract kids that don't really even understand what the idea of a Western God is. So, I mean, a lot of times when we have kids coming from Japan or China because their parents' business moved them over here, we really have to begin explaining the gospel at what is a God? And that's really what we have to work with from the very beginning, because Japan, for example, is so atheistic now. And a little bit of religion that is in there is so different from our Judeo-Christian mindset that we really have to begin at the foundations and then slowly work our way up to who is Jesus, what he did for you, and why that matters. And it is such a great way to really reach the world in one classroom. Our school really only has about 170 students, but in those 170 students are represented 20 different countries. 20 different countries. 170 students. Let that ratio sink in. Less than 10% of our school is Peruvian. That means that we are reaching 19 countries from around the world while serving here in Peru. And that's just such a great opportunity from a missionary point of view. And then when these kids get saved, they take the gospel back with them into their country. So imagine, and this happens pretty regularly throughout the history of ICS Lima. Let's say a Japanese kid. Japan is very atheistic, very science-based, very there is no God, strong atheist country lately. So the kid's parents, they'll be moved to Peru. And there's actually one of the largest percentages of immigrants would be Asian, so like China, Japan, South Korea. And all that goes back to probably like World War I and World War II, and it's a very interesting history about why there's that business bond between Peru and those countries that maybe we can get in at a different podcast. Anyways, we have an Asian kid. They come to Peru, and the parents look at the different schools that are around. Now, this Asian kid, this Japanese kid, doesn't know Spanish. He only knows, well, Japanese. And his parents think about it, well, why would he learn Spanish when there are schools in Peru that teach English and Spanish? And then they start looking at the prices of those schools. And there's really only three schools in the entire city that offer high level of education and are fully English based. And then they look at the prices, and ours is actually kind of cheap in comparison. And then they realize that we're Christian. They're like, we're not so sure about that, but maybe it's not a bad idea. In case he does go study in the United States, it wouldn't be bad for him to know about what I'm assuming a lot of his friends in the States would believe, or at least their parents would believe. And so they go ahead and they send their kid to our school. They look at our track record, the average SAT score, our college acceptance rate, what kind of colleges our kids are getting into. They look at our advanced placement programs, and then they weigh it out to them having one class about religion. They're like, yeah, it's definitely worth it. And it's also pretty close to where we're going to live. So then they send their kid here. Most businesses will have you locate or relocate at about 2 years. And in 2 years, that really is enough time to get a kid to understanding what the Western world idea of a God is, all the way to understanding who Jesus is. And over the last 3.5 years, I've seen this happen. Last semester alone, we had about 12 kids accept Christ, which was truly amazing. And that was the highest number I saw in one semester while here. And a lot of them were in 5th grade. I think like 6, 7 5th graders got saved at once. And so that was awesome. Just the Holy Spirit was really working through my coworker Ashley that day. And all these kids just came to know Christ. And that was truly amazing. And I mean, with 6 or 7 kids from our school, that's probably 3 or 4 different countries. And I just really love being part of this ministry. So right now, I am the English teacher, high school English teacher. So I teach 9th grade through 12th grade English, not English as a foreign language, but, standard English. 2 of those classes are AP classes. And I also teach 1 Bible class. And for the school year 2020 to 2021, I'll be taking on the chaplain role. And I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be the one in charge of having chapels on Fridays, about planning high school retreat and spiritual emphasis week. And I'm just really looking forward to that opportunity God has given me to be the chaplain next year. My wife, Paola, has started a ministry called Schoolhouse Gone. And so what this is both a business and a ministry, and it's about a month and a half old. My wife graduated college with a degree in special needs education. She loves, kids with Down syndrome, autism, ADHD, ADD, all of that. And she is so good and so patient and so compassionate. And she is taking that education and taking that passion and is providing it to different families around the city. And so what she does is she'll schedule different appointments, sometimes weekly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and she will go to that kid's house and they'll have like a little tutoring session. But I mean, it's not tutoring like how I would think about it as a high school English teacher. It's there's a lot more Play-Doh involved, a lot more crafts, and it's really helping these kids develop different sensory and motor skills. So with Schoolhouse Gone, she's able to go into these homes and be a light and a blessing to these kids that operate differently than the status quo, and also be just a great testimony to the parents of these kids, and to really just show them Christ's love outside of the classroom and in their home. And there are just some very beautiful relationships being formed between our family and their families. And it's just been so great watching my wife take this initiative, follow the passions that God has given her, and take these bold steps of faith of leaving her job at the nursery that she was working at last year and starting her own ministry. And it's just been so awesome to watch. So in many ways, my wife and I both use education as a ministry tool. Something else that my wife and I both do here in Peru is we are on the leadership team of Iglesia Nueva Vida, which means in English, New Life Church. It is part of the New Life Church network in the States, mostly in Chicago. I think stateside they have about 30 different campuses. The main pastor is Mark Job in the States, and we are one of 8 foreign church plants. And over the last few years, Paola and I got to know the pastor, and we started attending, and then the Lord just opened door after door after door for us to serve in this ministry here. So sometimes I'll do pulpit supply. Also, Paola has some biblical counseling background, so she is supporting the church in that, and I am helping develop small groups and other ministries as we go along. So about this podcast is actually about 2 years in the making. I bought the equipment to make this podcast about 2 years ago. I was in the States over summer break, and I had been thinking about it for a while, been praying about it for a while, and so I went ahead and I bought the microphone. I bought, the other little things you need like that off of Amazon, and it was all shipped to my brother's house in Arizona. And it was packed up and it was brought down to Peru when I came back, and then nothing happened. Part of why is just because of missionary life, like most lifestyles in the 21st century, is just really busy. There was just always papers to grade or lesson plans to write or a message to develop or someone's needs to be prayed over and met, or I was also just tired and exhausted, and any free time that I did have, I didn't want to put into this, and so there were all different kinds of reasons as to why this podcast didn't get off the ground before. However, now because of coronavirus, I find myself with a little bit more free time, and then after a little bit of prayer, I felt strongly that it was finally time to make the podcast. I had no more excuses. There was no more lack of time. I can't leave the house. So what better opportunity to finally start a project that I was super excited about 2 years ago and has remained in the back of my mind than now, than the present, than the entire nation of Peru essentially being under house arrest because of the coronavirus. The goal for this podcast is to share real stories of real missionaries, church leaders, and expats. The truth is, I am probably not going to be remembered as a great missionary of all time like Hudson Taylor or Francis Chan, who just left for Myanmar recently. And most of my friends won't either. And I just remember growing up as a missionary kid, hearing all these great stories and just thinking, yeah, these stories are awesome. What Hudson Taylor did in China is great and memorable. But who's going to tell my dad's story? What kind of stories are out there about serving God that are actually, relatable to me? Who's telling the story of, my Uncle Jim getting his car stolen while he was preaching, or the stories of all the single ladies here who have, basically sacrificed a dating life to come down to Peru, and there's really no single missionary guys for them to have coffee with. So they put their romantic lives basically on hold until further notice. Who is telling these stories? And that was just always in the back of my mind growing up. And I really didn't know what to do about it. And then around college, I got really into podcasts, and I realized maybe this is a way to do something about it, to tell these stories, to have these conversations, to have real conversations about what it was like growing up as a missionary kid, with all the advantages and the crazy, beautiful things that happened to me, the way I saw God provide in completely unique ways that, unless you're a missionary kid, you won't see, but also the negative side, right? For every time that someone from a church paid our way to Disneyland, there were years of not seeing friends. There was identity crisis of not understanding what it meant to be American born, American raised at home, but growing up in Peru and not speaking till later in life, but when I spoke, I was bilingual. But not as bilingual as my classmates. And so there's fantastic, great, beautiful things about growing up as a missionary kid, but it's not all fun. It's not all, roses and chocolates. There's also negative aspects. And growing up as a missionary kid, I would have loved to have had something to listen to where it was older missionary kids, adult missionary kids telling their stories and expressing what it was like growing up like that, the good and the bad. And there was really only like one really bad young adult novel, and I don't remember a lot about it besides the main character being annoying and whiny, and something about a snowmobile race at the end. And I think she was a missionary kid from Brazil, and then she was like having to adjust to life in Nebraska, and then there was a snowmobile chase, and it just wasn't really that good of a book. So there was that. And then there was the famous book about third culture kids by David Pollock, Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds, which is a really great book, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in what it was like to grow up as a missionary kid. But it's also a little dry and encyclopedic, like great content, but it didn't quite fill that hole, so to speak, that was there as a kid. What did, though, was talking to older missionary kids. My brother is about 7 years older than me, so which isn't a lot now, but when you're 7 and your brother is 14, that's a big age difference. And he was able to give me a lot of really good tips and insights as to how to navigate your identity and wrestle with growing up in two different cultures. And also, every time I came across an adult missionary kid, I would just drill them with questions about what the States was actually like and what Peru was like when they were here, and just any kind of question like that. And how did they figure out who they were, and what does it mean to be American to them, and how on earth do you answer the question, where are you from, in under 3 minutes? One of the goals for this podcast is for it to not just be me, but I want to have interviews and discussions with other missionaries and ministry leaders here in Peru about how missions has changed over 30 years and what it is like to serve God in Peru, and maybe compare and contrast that to what you, the listeners' normal experience might be in the States. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the main reasons why I've started this podcast is because of, the lockdown, the coronavirus. I don't know when this podcast is going up exactly, but currently, at the time of recording, it is March 20th. March 6th was when Peru discovered that the coronavirus had crept into its borders. It came from a passenger from Spain or Italy, and then it began to quickly spread from there. March 15th, the president ordered a shutdown across all of Peru. There really isn't too much of a debate about, state power and federal power. There is really almost just federal power. And part of that is also just the size of Peru. It's only a country of about 30 million, and about 10 million of that 30 million live in the capital city, Lima. So the president goes and orders a shutdown. So school is canceled, and really the only businesses that are to remain open are banks, hospitals, grocery stores, and pharmacies. Everything else needs to be shut down. Well, people didn't really take that seriously, and they were still going to the parks and to the beaches and took it more of a surprise holiday than they did as a quarantine. So it escalated a bit. And then it really got shut down to the point where if you are outside from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., you will be taken to jail. Just last night, someone was actually taken to jail for walking their dog. It wasn't me, even though I do have a dog. And she may have actually been able to sneak outside and relieve herself before we all went to bed. But thankfully, I was not the one that got put in a slammer for it. The last I heard was about 400 people have been sent to jail for being out past curfew. It's essentially martial law. There's police out there. There's also army out there. It's crazy. Now, number-wise, there's only like around 150, less than 200 that have the coronavirus. And depending where you're from, that might not sound like a lot. And I agree. 200 people in a city of 10 million really isn't that bad. But you have to take into consideration how congested this city is, how fast the virus should spread due to things like our public transportation system, all the buses, all the taxis that people use. Most people don't own their own car. So in order to stop this from spreading like wildfire, we really did have to go under martial law. Another reason why Peru took the lockdown so seriously is also because of the healthcare infrastructure. We only have about 450 of those respiratory machines that most countries have been using to deal with COVID-19. Only 450 for a city of 10 million and a country of 30 million. So in order to keep things running, we really did need a shutdown for 15 days, which means that I've been an online teacher, like just about every teacher around the world. And there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to teaching online. I'm enjoying it as, an experiment in education, but I don't know if I would love doing it for 3 months. But for 2 weeks, and hopefully it's only 2 weeks, it's been kind of cool. I think it's been a good, change of pace for everyone who is healthy. By no means am I making light of the people who have died or who are, locked or shut away from loved ones. Also, our borders are now completely shut. No one is really allowed to come in or out of the country as of Monday, which was the 16th. My parents had a missions trip here, and they were here before things got bad, and now it looks like that missions team is stuck. They are a missions team from Oklahoma, and there's about 26 of them, and around 16 of them were teenagers, high school students, who just wanted to come to Peru to serve, to be a blessing to different churches and to my parents' school on the other side of Lima. And now it looks like they are stuck here for 2 weeks unless the senator of Oklahoma can figure out a way to negotiate some sort of deal with the president of Peru. My wife and I know two elderly pastors. They're both in their 70s, maybe even 80s, who are currently stuck in Peru. And, what's really scary about that is they are the vulnerable age of the coronavirus. They are that dangerous demographic, and the one pastor has been having trouble finding his medication. He only brought enough for 1 week because when he left, it looked like the virus would stay in China, maybe Europe. No one really was thinking it would come all the way over to South America at that point. No one really thought that, the entire country would be under lockdown. So obviously he didn't bring enough for 3 weeks. He only brought enough for his trip. And so we're all just really praying that, that missions team gets to go home and that the kids can see their parents, and that these two elderly pastors who just wanted to come to Peru and to do a marriage conference for a few churches, that the Lord will just open the doors for them to get back home soon. And speaking of Peru, in case, it's been a while since 10th grade geography, Peru is in South America. It is bordered by Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. Peru is divided geographically into 3 main regions: the coast, the mountains, the jungle. The coast is where I live and I serve and I grew up. That is where the main and capital city is, Lima, also where I lived and where I serve now. It's very, very dry for most of the coast. The Atacama Desert starts in southern Peru and goes all the way down into like Chile and Argentina. I think the Sahara is the hottest desert, but Atacama is the driest. I think I've seen it rain in the 22 years I've lived here. I've seen it rain in Lima, like real drops and lightning, thunderstorm. The trees get cleaner because it rained. They don't get like muddy because of all the dust type of rain. Your car looks clean after it rains, not your car looks like it was driven through a dust storm after it rains. Kind of rain 3 times. So in about 22 years, I've seen real rain in Lima 3 times. It is very, very dry, very, very dusty. And all throughout the coast, you will see these smaller mountains or gigantic hills, whichever way you look at it. And these are called the foothills of the Andes. Now, the Andes mountains are gorgeous. They are lush, vibrant, full of wildlife. And this is where you get Machu Picchu, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And yes, Machu Picchu is as cool as it looks. It's awesome. I went there for my senior trip in high school. It was super cool. Not my favorite place in the mountains. That would actually be Huaraz. But you definitely need to check out Machu Picchu if you're ever in South America. Now, if you cross over the Andes Mountains, you get to the jungle. The jungle is rainforest. It is where we get a lot of our food from. A lot of our vegetables are grown in the jungle, and it's the only source of like lumber that the country has itself. And it is super hot. There's all sorts of weird bugs, and my wife loves the jungle. It is her favorite of the 3 parts of Peru. I think nothing would make her happier than the Lord to call us to the jungle, and it is beautiful to look at, but I am just not a fan of sweating all the time. There is, in the jungle, because it's a rainforest, you just always feel hot and wet. There's just always this moistness in the air, and the spiders are gigantic and hairy, and they're tarantulas, and the snakes are huge, and I am honestly scared of the jungle. There are some really scary parts of the jungle. If you don't believe me, just watch like half an hour of National Geographic. Now, granted, the jungle also has proper cities. Paola lived in the jungle for a year, and she lived right outside of a decent sized city, and that city actually had 2 malls. So a lot parts of the jungle part of that jungle region is actually pretty well developed, and they had McDonald's and movie theaters. And then you drive about an hour away, and you're Tarzaning it through the trees, accidentally grabbing pythons instead of vines. And there's also very much that aspect of it as well. So that was just a little bit about Peru, a little bit about how Peru is dealing with the coronavirus, a little bit about what I'm hoping this podcast will be in the future, and a little bit about my wife and I. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for making it all the way through. Thank you for being patient and listening all the way. This is my first podcast. I really have never recorded my own voice before. I'm not a sound engineer. I am in the guest bedroom of the 2-bedroom apartment that we rent late at night so that our neighbors thankfully are not having a party. I really don't know what I'm doing, but I'm super excited to finally be doing whatever this is. And my hope and my prayer is that people will like this, that people in Peru, my fellow co-workers, will be able to listen to this and to hear their stories and to laugh and cry with each other, that my friends and family back in the States will have a better idea of what it is my parents have done down here for over 30 years, what I am doing down here for about 3.5 years so far, and a better idea about what Peru is actually like, all the coolness, the beauty, the weirdness, the culture differences between the United States and Peru. And also I hope that missionaries around the world maybe will listen to this and they'll feel heard, and they might maybe get some tips, not from me, but maybe from the people I interview, and that people back at home in different churches across the States will hear this and will be able to understand better how to pray for their missionaries. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope that you enjoyed my monologue about, Peruvian geography and a short history of the coronavirus versus Peru, and a little bit about who my wife and I are and what we're doing here in Lima, Peru, and what I hope this podcast will be in the future. Please email me at cmfrey, Frey, 427 at gmail.com with any questions or feedback. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot to me that you made it this far, and I hope to see you next Monday.